Investing in smaller multifamily buildings such as duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes can be a strategic move for real estate investors. These properties offer a balance between single-family homes and larger apartment complexes, providing unique opportunities and challenges. Smaller multifamily properties are the unsung heroes of real estate investing, offering both cash flow and scalability that single-family homes can't often match. But understanding the intricacies of duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes is crucial for investors aiming to maximize returns while navigating regulatory landscapes. Overlooking these specific requirements and potential pitfalls of these properties can lead to financial setbacks, legal complications, and missed opportunities in a competitive market. Now, imagine that you're purchasing a triplex, but you don't realize it didn't comply with local fire safety regulations, leading to unexpected renovation costs and tenant dissatisfaction. What am I talking about here? I have seen this time and time again. So triplexes, so we're talking about forget about single families, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes. Doesn't seem to be that much of a difference. The difference between a duplex and a triplex is that a duplex, 2 units, triplexes, 3 units, okay, fine, is that at least here in Winnipeg in Manitoba, there are special regulations for a triplex, which are the same regulations, believe it or not, as an entire apartment block complex. Currently, as of the recording of this video, triplexes have to have a fire safety system, including hardwired safety systems with pull stations, those red pull stations with the alarm bells. You have to have fire extinguishers in each unit. You have to have a sign saying how to exit. You have to have a whole building wired together with a fire alarm in the basement. And if you have a gas heating appliance, you need to have a special an annual gas inspection and file that with the city. Plus, it gets better. You need to file and get a license for an apartment block. I think, again, at the time of this video, that's probably upwards of $600-700 for the license, plus an extra, $300-500 for that special safety inspection. And then you have to comply with all of the other regulations. You need to get the fire system inspected every year. You have to get the fire extinguishers certified every year. So that's probably a couple $1,000s, okay? When you divide that by 12, talking $200-300 a month in cash flow. But a triplex doesn't generate that much cash flow. Typically a triplex, at least in an older building, you've got 2 decent sized units and maybe a bachelor or 1 bedroom squished on top of a 1.5 story or a 2.5 story building. So you're not talking about a lot of cash flow here. And if you didn't factor these things in, $250-300 that you're now having to give up, maybe your building is actually negative in cash flow, okay? And only because you didn't know anything that you needed to do this for a triplex. Renovation costs, you could buy a triplex, then all of a sudden get a visit a few months after possession from a fire inspector, and then they slap you with a citation. So now you have fines, now you have a certain amount of time to get these things done. And the fire department, at least here in Manitoba, has the power to close down and shut the building, order a mandatory vacate if you don't have those safety procedures and safety systems in place. So it's pretty serious. And all because you're like, well, I just bought a triplex, right? Never mind if you didn't have the zoning and approval for that triplex. So, it might seem to be, what's the big deal? It's only a triplex, but there is a big deal. So let's define smaller multifamily buildings. As I said, a duplex, a property divided into 2 separate units. Okay, that's kind of self-explanatory. And as I said, a triplex would contain 3 distinct units, a fourplex, 4 units. Okay, now in Winnipeg, it's common to find older single-family homes converted into duplexes or triplexes. That's where I talked about the 2.5 story with a bachelor squished in on top. These conversions might not always comply, like I said, with zoning. So what does that mean? Well, you might have, at least here in Manitoba, I keep saying that because I have an audience all over the world, but wherever your regulation body is, there's going to be zoning. Okay, here in Manitoba, you could have R1, residential 1, which stands for residential single family dwelling. And sometimes there's R2, sometimes there's commercial. The important thing is if you're in the market for buying a duplex or a triplex or even a fourplex, check with zoning. Usually it's going to be on the property tax bill. Usually you might, depending where you are, be able to do a free search on that. But the point is, if you're buying a triplex and you look at the zoning and it's only zoned for a single dwelling, then by you renting that out, you can't just say, well, I'm grandfathered, and sometimes you might be, but make sure, because if you aren't, they're going to shut you down or they're going to force you to only rent it out as one single family home. And that is going to completely kill your calculations, because I'm assuming you bought this property and it was probably priced at a higher value than a typical single family home because the listing said it was a triplex with all of those nice cash flow benefits. Okay. Regulatory considerations. We already talked about fire safety compliance, but let's get into that just a little bit. Triplexes and fourplexes in Winnipeg must adhere to the residential fire safety bylaw. And you can write this down just so you can look it up, 4304/86, which may require installations, like I said, fire alarms, emergency lighting, proper fire separations. If you don't comply, we talked about penalties. We talked about the ability for them to give you a deadline and then close you down, basically evict your tenants. And then if they evict your tenants, now you could be on the hook for liabilities in terms of hotel costs, food, rehousing them until they find a place. So, I mean, all of that can be avoided by doing proper due diligence before you buy. Okay? Don't just assume that ignorance is bliss and you're able to get away with it. It doesn't work like that anymore. Licensing requirements, I'll deep dive into that a little bit more. So properties, again, underneath this bylaw, with 3 or more units may need a converted residential dwelling license, okay, a CRD, with annual fees, mandatory inspections, like I said, for the heating and things like that, for the heating appliance, which adds to your operating costs. You also have rent control implications. In Manitoba, and depending if you're in a what they call landlord-friendly state, this might not apply to you. But in Manitoba, in 2025, the rent increase guidelines is only set at 1.7%. But units renting for more than 1,640 or more per month, and those in buildings that were first occupied more than 20 or more recently, and so buildings in 20 years or newer are exempt from those guidelines. So you have to know that. However, there is a difference between a triplex and a fourplex if you aren't exempt, meaning in a single duplex or triplex, if it is under, like, not exempt, so single, duplex, triplex, as soon as somebody moves out, you can reset that rent. If they're still living there, then you have to go to the allowable guidelines. And I'm going to talk about this more, I think, in next episode. I'll do an entire episode on rent control and the consequences. But single, duplexes, triplexes in Manitoba, as soon as somebody moves out, they call it voluntary vacate. You can then charge whatever you want up to market rent, of course. A fourplex, assuming it's not exempt, is the same as an apartment block. So if you've had somebody living there for 20 years, you buy a building and you think you're going to be able to increase the rent and it's not exempt and they're paying $600 and market rent is $1,400, you cannot charge more than $600. If you do, it's illegal and then you're going to have to pay that back. Again, I'll do that more in another episode. I think I want to really dive deeper into that. Now, there is an affordability component here because generally these buildings, these smaller multifamilies, are more affordable than a large apartment block complex. Okay. Income stability, multiple units can offset vacancy. So I'm talking about income stability versus a single family home. Okay. So that ensures much more steady cash flow. So if you've got a triplex and that little Bachelor is empty, and you've got the other 2 units that can kind of cover your operating expenses, your mortgage, insurance, property tax, etc. Scalability. It is easier to manage and finance compared to a much larger property. Okay, when you're dealing with apartment blocks, cap rates, lenders, due diligence, months and months, certificates with Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, there's just a lot more things, environmental. So it's a little bit easier to finance the smaller multifamilies, but there's always disadvantages. It's going to be higher turnover. Okay, because shared spaces most likely lead to shorter tenant stays. And I'm talking about now specifically not a large apartment block, but a single family home versus a duplex. Now you're sharing a wall. Now you have half a yard. Sometimes people don't like that. And therefore, it's not as stable in terms of, are they going to stay 3 to 5 years like they do with our company? Or are they only going to stay a year because it depends if they're fighting with their neighbors, there's noise, somebody works night shift. I mean, you can't control that, right? But you can to a certain extent with a single family home, because what happens behind closed walls is up to the tenants, and they're not going to disturb themselves, obviously. Maintenance costs, so that's a factor. Increased wear and tear due to multiple occupants. So that's, I guess, a detraction. You've got common area hallways, bicycles, tire marks up the hallway stairs. Who's cleaning? You've got other excess costs because of the common area, let's say snow removal, grass cutting, even the hydro for the light above the door, which can't be paid for by any other tenant. It has to be paid for by the landlord. Okay. Regulatory compliance. So there are additional requirements that can escalate costs and complexity, as I've said. So let's summarize it for you. Smaller multifamily buildings, they do present very good opportunities for investors, but they do come with specific challenges. Now, through due diligence, understanding local regulations, but being proactive on the property management, that's essential to capitalize on the potential. So for more insights and resources on real estate investing, feel free to visit our website, subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed, and get ahead in the market. Thanks for watching today.